Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a 1970s film called The Conformist, which is an Italian piece of cinema. As you can see here, the release date was 1970. It's considered a political drama, which is something we haven't dove into much in this particular class. But one of the things you'll see if you kind of look around the world and look at different moments in cinema history, you're going to find that there's going to be filmmakers who touch on the politics of their country, right? And this is no exception. Bernardo Bertolucci is the director, and this film deals with fascism, which was kind of the reigning governmental kind of process that Italy had from, I think, the 20s up through World War II until Mussolini was ousted. It's the first collaboration between Bernardo Bertolucci, who's the director, and a cinematographer by the name of Vittorio Storaro. And Vittorio Storaro is a famous cinematographer in his own right, but Bertolucci and Storaro had many collaborations, 9 collaborations over their career, and they are considered a dynamic duo when it comes to director slash cinematographer in the work that they do. It's definitely an artistic film. This is a different style of film than we've seen up to this point. Even if you look at like Breathless and things like that, which have kind of a different style about which they're made, this film kind of pushes that envelope just a little bit more. And it's a very visual film in the sense that you get more about the story if you just pay attention to the visuals than you would even through the dialogue of the film. So it's a little bit unique in that way. It's also edited in a non-linear fashion, meaning the story is not told in a linear way. We kind of flash back and then flash back to present day, back and forth kind of thing. So sometimes you think it could be a little bit hard to follow, partially because it's going to be in Italian and then it's going to be bouncing around a little bit. But if you really just kind of dive into the visuals of it, I think you'll find that you can kind of pick up what the themes are and kind of what the motivating factors are for each actor as they make their way through the story. This next slide up is just kind of showing the artistic, creative visuals that you're going to see along the way. Bertolucci and Storaro together actually put some very dynamic images together. This is one of them that you're going to see pretty early in the film. This kind of monochromatic, almost looks black and white, and you have these hard light lines and these hard shadow lines that you're seeing in the images. This is another one inside an apartment, and again, you have these very dynamic graphic lines that you can see in the image with light and with wardrobe and with production design. So a lot of different elements coming into play here in this particular shot. And then finally, this last one. This is a very stark image. There's not a lot going on, but there's a lot of geometry, a lot of angles going on with the production design and the set that you see behind him. And then you have the light with the cross kind of coming across the ground right there. So it's just a very visually interesting looking film with very kind of dynamic compositions that you're going to see. Very thought out compositions all throughout the film. So first we're going to talk a little bit about Bernardo Bertolucci. Bertolucci, again, world famous filmmaker. He's a director and a screenwriter. He's definitely an auteur director, which is something we've spoken about in other modules. He directed 22 films. He has 22 films to his credit so far. The themes that he explores are pretty interesting along the way. He definitely doesn't shy away from controversial topics. You're going to see him talk about or deal with politics, which you see in this particular film. You see him dive into kind of themes of sexuality, which is something unique that you didn't really see much in the 1970s and in early cinema history as well. He definitely dives into kind of self-realization and kind of how people kind of perceive themselves and how they want to be perceived by the world in that's in front of them, right? So you'll see a lot of that in this particular film. He's definitely an educated filmmaker, but not in film. I don't believe he went to film school in his college days. He actually studied poetry in his early days and then transitioned into filmmaking, which is kind of unique, but not unheard of. You'll find a lot of filmmakers actually start out in a different world, right? And studying something different or doing something different, and then they make their way to cinema one way or another, right? Now that we've talked about the director, so next up we're talking narrative. This is definitely an adapted screenplay, meaning it was, I think Bertolucci wrote it with someone else, I believe, and it was an adapted screenplay off a book by the same name, The Conformist. I believe the book was written in 1951, and then this film's a 1970s piece of cinema. Again, a nonlinear storytelling kind of device is used, and that's for the screenplay for sure. So again, this story isn't told in a linear fashion. We're not going to see the story play out A to B to B to C, C to D, so on and so forth. You kind of see them actually start out more towards the end of the movie, and then it kind of goes back and shows you pieces of our main character's life, and then it's going to pop back in and come back to present day. So you'll see that kind of happen all throughout the film. And again, because it's in Italian and it is bouncing around a little bit, you do have to pay attention closely because it can get a little confusing. The plot, we're looking at a guy named Clerici, who is kind of an agent for the fascist government, and he's been given a mission to go assassinate a political rival, an anti-fascist, who's a professor of his from his past life, right? When he was in school, he had this professor, and this guy has moved to a different part of the world. They're now in, the professor now lives in Paris, and his job is to go to Paris and assassinate him for the fascist government. But you can see he has a struggle with kind of, does he want to be a part of, like, does he want to be a killer? Does he want to be a murderer? And he actually believes that he already is, and that's why one of the reasons why he kind of gets into this whole fascist, like buys into this fascist kind of way of life and this idea of conforming. That's actually a thing that he's kind of dealing with. If you go into themes, you think about kind of in this particular movie, his idea that he wants to just be normal and fit in. So he wants to have like a normal life and conform to the reality that's in front of him, but he doesn't feel like he fits in. He feels like he's kind of a, sexual deviant, and he feels like he is immoral, a murderer. And you find out that along the way that maybe these aren't necessarily true things, but his fight to just kind of fit in and be normal is something that he's working hard to do. That's kind of his inner or internal struggle throughout the film, but you find out that it's a little bit misguided along the way. So again, you want to kind of pay attention to the storyline and the themes that it's trying to portray along the way, because that's very important in this particular film. Next up, we're talking about Vittorio Storaro. Storaro is the cinematographer of this particular movie. And again, we talked about how they had 9 different collaborations along the way. Some of the more famous films that they collaborated on after The Conformist would have been Last Tango in Paris, another one called, I believe it's called Luna, and then there's 1900. And then The Last Emperor is another one. So those are some great films to check out as well if you want to see some more work after you see how stylized and creative this project actually is. Storaro is very much into color theory, and not just the idea of complementary colors, what complement each other, what different color palettes and styles can people use. He's really into the emotion behind color and how different colors make people feel, right? Each color represents something different in even different parts of the world, and he has a very good understanding of that. And so when he's shooting, he definitely uses color to help tell his story, and you're going to see some very creative use of color in this particular film. Okay, so look out for that color, and look at when the color shifts in this particular film, because that's important. He's got 3 Academy Awards to his name. So he's a very talented cinematographer. Another great film that he shot was Apocalypse Now. Okay, so the cinematography is the next thing we're going to talk about in The Conformist. It definitely has a lot of, again, creative aspects to it, right? Early on, it's a very monochromatic cage that he's built for his character. So it feels almost black and white, but it's not. It's in color, very stark and very sterile, and very symmetrical, like a lot of straight lines and stuff like that, until we do get a very specific scene that uses some different techniques, which we'll talk about. And then when he goes on his mission, we start to see a different city, which is Paris, And in that city, a lot of color gets introduced to the story when we get there. But when he's back in Italy and he's dealing with the fascist government and where he lives, it's a very stark kind of black and white environment. And when we talk about the cage, look at this, the production design and the lighting, where there's a lot of like straight lines and kind of bars and framing him within a frame. If you look at it and you pay close attention, you'll see him framed within a frame and having a lot of bars done with lighting and different effects. You'll see some of that, and that's kind of the whole aspect of him being in a cage, right? Seeing these straight lines, it's almost like he's in a jail cell in some of the scenes. So take a peek for that. I'll actually show you some clips from that as well. When he gets on his mission, the lighting gets a lot softer. It's not as hard, and you definitely will see a lot more color. Limited space throughout. So limited space is the idea of, again, the way that the compositions are set up is we're kind of boxing our main character, Clerici, into frames and boxing him into corners in the frame. And then we're also using the production design to create frames and boxes and placing him in these little tight windows. You'll see they're in a little music hall later in the film. And again, they frame him up so that he's inside one of the window frames. You see him put a gun to his head at one point when he's early on in the film, and he's framed within the elevator frame, which is kind of limiting his space. You're going to see him in a car window a few times where they limit what you can see of his face with the fogged up window and then the frame of the car. There's many opportunities where you're going to see him kind of framed within a frame, and that's very intentional because they're really trying to show how he's boxed in and he's trying to conform to this really narrow space about what he thinks his life should be and what kind of person he should be. They use some interesting long, what are called tracking shots. So it's a dolly shot. It's a moving shot where we track alongside something, and they're very long and kind of picturesque and kind of pretty tracking shots. That's something that you see heavily in this particular film, especially early on. And then at one point they get to the Dutch angle shots, right? So one of the things you'll see, and I'm going to pop it up here. This is when these shots that are popping up, these are when we're talking about him going on his trip, and we see a lot more color being introduced to the scene compared to the last three clips that you saw. And then if we pop through again, you're going to see three more shots. These are some of him being framed within a frame, these top two. So if you see that top one, he's the guy on the left, and he's kind of boxed up against the edge of the frame, and then he's framed within the little window square. And then there's that one I talked to you about the window, so you can see that he's kind of boxed into that car window there. And then that bottom one gets us to our next thing when we're talking about, after tracking shots, we're talking about Dutch shots. So Dutch shots are when you take the camera and you kind of tilt it on its side like this, and it creates interesting angles that catch us because they look a little different. Like we can't see a straight horizon line, so they're very unique. And in this particular sequence that you see, he's going to visit his mother, and it's a series of tracking shots, and none of them are straight. They're all Dutch shots. So Dutch shots are shots when you take the camera and you kind of put it on an angle so that the horizon line is off kilter. And that's a technique that gets used to kind of put the audience at a sense of unease or unrest at that particular time, right? And then the idea of using light and dark when it comes to the lighting. You're going to see very high contrast lighting, meaning there's bright areas and then very dark areas, which has an Italian name, which I'm going to completely butcher. I'm going to say chiaroscuro, but that's probably completely butchered. But I understand the concept and I use it all the time. Again, it's the idea of being using very high contrast lighting, meaning bright areas and then dark areas. And you're going to see some shots that have a lot of lighting, especially early on, where it's very contrasty. One of the more famous scenes in the film is when Clerici goes to meet with his professor for the first time, and they're in this room that's completely pitch black, except there's very dramatic light coming through the windows. And then at one point, one of the characters closes a window and it gets even darker. And then at some point, the window opens back up. And so again, it's very high contrast lighting, very dramatic, and it just sets the tone kind of between, it kind of adds to the theme of his kind of mental tormented kind of mindset where should he be, what's right, what's wrong, what's the light, what's the dark, what's good, am I bad. That whole idea of light and dark plays into the themes of the film extremely well. Acting performance. So if we get into acting, there's not a ton to say here. The acting performances are very well done, but it's a little bit dated, right? So you're going to see very melodramatic acting, meaning it's a little bit overacted. Okay, you're going to find that it's going to be a little bit overly dramatic with everybody. Clarici as a character, he's definitely an anti-hero, meaning he's our protagonist, and he is not like a classic protagonist that's a really great guy. He's definitely kind of a tortured soul kind of thing, which we've dealt with the anti-hero in previous modules, okay? And then again, you also want to look at Clarici's struggle and his character arc as you pay attention to the film. This film really tries to get into what his struggles are and what leads him to his position that he's currently in the day, right? He's on this mission to kind of fit in and be an active member of the fascist party, but what takes him there and what happened in his background, what trauma is there that makes him believe that this is a proper route, and does he have any moral dilemmas there? Does he really like believe that this is what he wants to do and who he wants to be, right? So really be looking at that, because that's something that is clear, and it definitely comes through in the performance of Clarici and the people he meets along the way. Editing technique. So again, we talked about this as how this is a non-linear story. So the story is written in such a way that it's going to be non-linear, right? It's going to not play out from beginning to end in a straightforward fashion, but it definitely has to be edited this way, right? So in order to tell the story this way, they have to edit it in a way where they take a little piece from the end of the movie, and then they bounce you back into a flashback earlier in his life, and then they'll bounce you back to the current time, and then maybe they'll bounce you back again to another time. So the movie does bounce around, and that's called non-linear editing, where we're telling a story in a non-traditional fashion. The editing definitely serves the story, because really what's the driving force of the story is Clarici and his mindset and his struggle and dilemma, internal struggle and dilemma as to what kind of person he wants to be. That's really the driving force of the story. There are things happening in his life, but those are just kind of products of his own mindset and what he's trying to be as a human being, right? So really think about that as you kind of watch this film play out. Again, I told you, this is a pretty artistic film, and you get a lot more from the visuals than you do from the dialogue, okay? The sound design. Sound design's pretty straightforward. There is one unique aspect to it, which they did a lot with Italian films, and that's called dubbing. So dubbing is when they take a voice actor after the film's been made, and then the voice actor will come in and redo the lines for one of the actors. So Clarici's voice is actually dubbed. It's not actually his voice that you hear. An actor came in and redid his lines because they wanted better Italian. I guess he wasn't really fluent. He learned his lines phonetically, and he spoke in Italian, but he didn't really speak the language, and so they dubbed it. And there are a couple other characters. I think the voice of the mom, and then one of the two main character women. One of them is dubbed over, and right now I'm trying to remember which one it is, and I can't. So one of them is dubbed over as well. So that's a pretty common thing with Italian films, and they definitely use it in this particular movie. The score actually does enhance the drama of the film. So there's this one kind of theme song that you'll kind of hear that's this very dramatic. It totally fits a political drama kind of score that you're going to hear that plays through a bunch of the scenes. One of the scenes that actually kind of look at how they change it a little bit is when Clarici is going to visit his mother, and he's being followed by these fascist kind of spy guys, and he's playing a game, a little cat and mouse with them. The soundtrack changes. There's this little whimsicalness to the sound, that the score that they're putting underneath that scene, which again, it's there to kind of add and enhance the storytelling, right? So listen to that score and try to see how it kind of helps get you in the mood of the scene that's particularly happening at that particular moment, because it's definitely very purposeful, and that's something you'll get in the sound design of this particular film. Because Bertolucci did not spare anything. He really did. He's very particular about the visuals that he wants to use and how he wants to shoot, but he's also very particular about the sound design that he uses in his production. Okay, these are going to be our cinematic terms, so make sure you understand and know these. Nonlinear editing, which is just editing the story not in a traditional fashion. We're going to bounce around in the storytelling, and that's something that gets used a lot historically in films, but this is kind of an early example of that. This word that, again, I'm going to butcher, chiaroscuro, is the idea of light and dark. I'm sure you can go find a better pronunciation of that. But again, it's the idea of high contrast light and dark lighting, which is an example on this picture right behind the terms. You see him walking through that hallway, and it's got those bright areas of light that came into the window, and then these areas of dark where the shadows, where the sun isn't hitting, right? We talked about limited space. Limited space is actually also exampled there, because see how the space that he's in is this huge space that he's walking through, but it's actually fragmented by the light on the walkway all along the way. And those even resemble kind of bars, or like prison bars, that he's in this place that's very rigid and structured, and he's got no escape from it. So that's a perfect example of kind of what I was talking about with limited space, and then using that idea of light and dark, high contrast lighting. The Dutch angle is a shot where we have the camera, instead of it being straight like this, we're going to tilt it like this. That's a Dutch shot. And you'll see that especially in that scene when he's going to visit his mother. And then we have dubbing, which is the idea of, or the act of, using voice actors to redo the dialogue for the actors in the film. Okay, so I know there's a lot there. There's a lot going on. This is a big lecture, but this movie is fantastic. Please sit down, give yourself time to watch it. Give yourself time to even go back and watch scenes again, because you might watch it, and then after you kind of read the dialogue at the bottom, then go back and just watch it for the visuals. So maybe not do the whole movie like that unless you have time, because it's a great way to go about it, but maybe just pick a few interesting scenes that stand out to you as you're watching the movie, read the dialogue and kind of watch it at the same time, but then go back and just watch the visuals, since you already know what they've said, and kind of just embrace that artisticness that's in this movie, because it's a fantastic movie that's very artistic and visual in its nature. So you want to go back and enjoy that. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, let me know. Reach out. Want to be a resource for you, and I hope this lecture video helps you out.